Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show, Curryup Startup Podcast, a podcast to spotlight Asian entrepreneurs and interesting allies that I meet in my life. Today, I have with me Melissa Frakman, who's joining us from Washington, D.C., here in the U.S. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Priyanka. It's so great to join you.
Thank you, Melissa. So, my guest for today, Melissa, is passionate about fintech, especially in India, and is focused on how to impact the lives of billions of people through local innovation and global collaboration. Fintech investor and entrepreneur Melissa Frakman has wonderful insights that she's going to share about the fintech ecosystem in India. She has over a decade of experience building businesses both in India and the US, and she loves connecting ideas across the world. She's also the founder and the managing director of EMVC, which we'll talk more about. With over 15 years of experience on the ground, including building products and partnerships for unicorns and Fortune 500 companies, Melissa has been named on the Global Fintech Power List and the India Fintech Awards. Melissa, it's an absolute honor for us to have you join the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really have admired the work you do in the DC ecosystem and the tech community here, and it's great to reconnect.
Thank you, Melissa. So today, for our listeners, with Melissa on the show, we're going to decode three major things. One is the fintech landscape in India. Two, what are the three traits that Melissa looks for when she wants to invest in startups? Three, what's the impact of COVID-19 on the startup ecosystem? And she has a couple of deals during the lockdown as well. So let's get into the secrets behind, what entrepreneurship brings about, and a lot of other things that Melissa is willing to share with our listeners today.
Great, let's get started.
So Melissa, you live here in Washington, D.C., but you also shuttle between D.C. and Mumbai. So as someone who's very familiar with the Mumbai traffic, how do you see the contrast between two cultures and the infrastructure?
Between Mumbai and DC, there's frankly no comparison. I mean, Mumbai is a true, absolutely large metropolitan city. There's no comparison in terms of size. Mumbai maybe could be compared to New York, but they're both sort of their own environments on their own as well. And even within the US, we work across the US with partners, Silicon Valley, Chicago, Texas, even in North America, in Mexico and Canada, etc. And in India, we work primarily in Bangalore and Mumbai, but with partners and entrepreneurs around the whole country. So I'd say, the cultures are vastly different. They're both complex enough, and in particular, India is complex enough that it's almost impossible to make grand sweeping comparisons. But to your point about traffic, I think Bangalore and Mumbai stand unparalleled as a world leader in terrible traffic. We were all sort of humored to understand that even during lockdown, when cars were basically banned from being on the road, there still was famous Bangalore traffic. And we already were a globally remote team. And so our team is across India, and we're able to still work with entrepreneurs extremely hands-on across time zones online, and look forward to getting back on the road when travel resumes.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing those interesting insights. Now let's look at the state of fintech in India. So India's digital payments market, according to a recent report by KPMG, is predicted to be valued at around 4,000 lakh crores by 2023-2024. And as we mentioned, even with COVID-19, fintech investments are on the rise. So Melissa, as somebody who has deep roots working with Indian entrepreneurs, how do you see the state of fintech in India?
So fintech in India has been exciting for many years, even before we termed it fintech. There's been this really exciting digital trajectory of the Indian economy over many years, even starting around 1991 with sort of historic economic reforms that happened through the implementation of India's biometric ID, Aadhaar, and then all of the things that were built on top of that, the IT boom of the 90s and all of the talent and tech that came out of that, to India going from really a services hub to being a really product-driven leader in the global economy. There are many fintech products, business models, distribution models, proprietary technology that's being developed in India that's far ahead of the rest of the world in many aspects of fintech, everything from digital payments, digital banking, retail asset management, insurance, etc. And it's booming. I mean, truly, the caliber of entrepreneurs, the caliber of iteration and design and product development that's happening in India right now across the country is truly unparalleled. And we believe that it's an extremely exciting moment for founders to be building in this space in India. And it's an exciting moment for global fintech companies and investors and the ecosystem to even be looking at India for partnerships, market expansion, etc.
So you mentioned that it's an exciting moment for entrepreneurs to be in the financial services and technology space. What are three challenges that you see for entrepreneurs in this specific domain?
I mean, entrepreneurship has unlimited challenges, but also unlimited opportunities. So it's hard to narrow down to three. I think a challenge for fintech entrepreneurs in general is that it's a highly regulated industry. And so to build meaningfully and move the needle forward meaningfully in this space, you're operating in an environment where the barriers to entry are a little bit higher than in other spaces, and you can't necessarily just kind of hack your way to a viral product. You have to work very closely with banks and the legal systems, et cetera, and that takes a certain kind of patience as an entrepreneur when all you want to do is move fast and break things. Two, in terms of the global market, in India, there's no lack of consumer startups that are scaling very fast, but continue to pivot with their business models. And so an interesting challenge, and it's a good problem to have, is that they have to be just at the absolute top of their game in every detail of the product that they're bringing to market for consumers, because consumers have spoils of options to use. And so products are sort of converging around similar ideas, which makes it a very fast-paced and competitive environment to build, relative, for instance, to other countries where the fintech trajectory has been a little bit less developed. And finally, I think it's not talked about as much, but fintech requires really good marketing, whether your customer is a small business or a consumer. Financial services on their own are not sexy, they're not cool. People aren't going to gravitate to downloading a new app unless you have really great brand and marketing for them to understand why it helps their life. So either massively convenient or massively well marketed, and hopefully a combination of both.
Definitely in a consumer-driven market, you have to appeal to the consumers as to why they need to use your specific service, right? Because they have tons of options to choose from. Which brings you to an interesting topic that I wanted to ask you. I grew up in Chennai, Melissa, and I came to the US a few years ago. So growing up, I saw, how my parents invested, in terms of the retirement funds or, ways to secure a future for us. And now as a digitally savvy millennial, my choices are very different. The way I look at financial investments is completely a paradigm shift. Now, you spoke about products being commoditized and India being a product hub rather than just a service hub. How do you think products are being commoditized to appeal to both ends of the spectrum, be it the legacy savers like my parents, as well as digitally savvy, the millennial generation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's several aspects to that. One is that India is super diverse. The consumers in Chennai, even the millennials in Chennai, are completely different users, and their profile of what they like in a product and what they're going to use is completely different than the millennials in Chandigarh or in Surat or anywhere else in the country. And so in general, the way the ecosystem is developing is that founders either are taking sort of a national approach and going very large and scaling, usually fueled by capital, to be able to tackle a pan-national problem, or they're hyper-localizing in certain geographies and really catering to a specific market segment and geography within the country. Digitally savvy millennials who are already online are a great market to experiment, move the needle forward. We're seeing a lot of sort of neobanks and personal finance management, PFM apps, pop up to serve this digitally native population with really innovative new credit savings products. But there absolutely is so much room to improve the lives of sort of the generations that are middle-aged now and continuing to age. We're very bullish at EMVC on opportunities for sort of savings and retirement products and how that whole market is evolving. And digitization is affecting everybody. For several of our portfolio companies, their target demographic and who is using their product are sort of head of households, often men in the community over 50, who kind of own a lot of the household spend in tier 2 to 4 cities. And most of sort of the parents' generation and even grandparents' generation are at least aware of what Paytm is. They have Google Pay on their phone now. They know what their UPI number is. And if at very minimum, they're logging into their bank account now to check what's going on, as opposed to the old school passbooks that State Bank of India was famous for. As another example, digital gold in India is becoming a very large thing and sort of leading the world in terms of innovation around digital gold, because Indians love gold as a savings mechanism. And that's another way to bring sort of digital innovation to the older generations.
Those are fascinating insights, Melissa. And my dad uses Paytm. Whenever he has a bill to pay, he's like, hey, there's Paytm, and he has this app downloaded. And I was pretty surprised, as to how consumers are really adapting, irrespective of the generations that they belong to as well. And the other point that you mentioned about gold, having grown up in the Indian culture, gold is seen as a secure investment for the future. And now I'm really impressed that people are comfortable with the idea of digital gold, which is a shift in the mindset. That's a challenging aspect as well.
In every aspect, everything from health insurance to life savings to pension, even to elder care. It's truly sort of across the board. And I think maybe I'm jumping ahead to something you wanted to talk about, but COVID has accelerated some of this digitization and digital adoption. Because even if people were already starting to accept these things and use them, being in a lockdown environment where there really was no way to walk to your local bank branch, or to go to your local Kirana mom and pop store to buy your food and groceries, accelerated a whole nother kind of cohort of users that wouldn't have been comfortable with their digital journey. And so it's interesting to see how and why and how much that will stick.
No, that brings a very good point, Melissa, in terms of a pandemic or a global crisis that really shifts consumer habits and lifestyle. That's pretty amazing how people all around the world are quickly changing their mindsets to get what they want. So let's talk about COVID, given that you mentioned about it. How are startups and venture capitalists navigating the tough economy? And congratulations, I know you've done a couple of deals during the lockdown as well. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thank you. We haven't announced the investments that we've made during this past sort of COVID period, but we have been very active in the market. Our long-term conviction in terms of the opportunity in the Indian market and the fundamentals of the economy remains strong. And we're excited to partner with founders that are building things for the long run that we believe are very durable and bringing a lot of development to the market and improvements in the lives of their consumers. India is still going through, as at the time of this recording, an extremely challenging time with COVID. We're nowhere near sort of out of the waters in terms of cases and deaths and spread of the virus. And so, of course, with the health and economic crisis that brings, there are many challenges, and it would be really insensitive to talk about kind of how great business is without realizing that the most important thing is that the country heals and that the population is able to kind of get the vaccine and support that's needed to get out of this health and economic crisis. That being said, the venture and tech ecosystem continues to move forward kind of at a very similar pace to pre-COVID levels. Founders in India have just so much hustle and so much grit and resilience that they are heads down, many of them working from home, many of them with teams that have gone back to their hometowns, so they're truly remote across the whole country, north, south, east, west. And they're building and shipping new products and features and raising new follow-on rounds, etc. And so it's very exciting to see that those things are still happening. I think with a very realistic lens too. It's not that people have blinders on about the reality on the ground, but anyone who's in the market with kind of long-term sticky capital, which is what private equity and venture capital is, believes in the trajectory of the country through these sort of ups and downs that are inherent in an emerging economy and through kind of challenges like this. And we believe that the companies that emerge from this will be even stronger.
That's very true. And I'm glad you're focused on a very bullish attitude in terms of how the country as well as entrepreneurs are going to pull themselves out of this rut and come out stronger and more healthier as well in terms of how businesses are being run too.
Yeah.
So speaking of hustlers, tell us about the idea behind EMVC. And I know you're a strong proponent of creating international strategic partnerships for Indian startups. So tell us more about EMVC.
Sure. So as mentioned at the beginning, we're an early stage venture capital fund investing sort of pre-seed to Series A in really exciting breakthrough companies in emerging markets that are fintech, both consumer, enterprise, and B2B. And really with a strong focus on India, because we have a fundamental belief as part of our thesis that India really is leading many other emerging markets in fintech. So we look for companies and products that are both scaling rapidly in the domestic market with a net positive impact for the users that they serve, and also have relevance in global markets, which means whether the companies themselves scale to the US or other international markets, or their tech is sort of adopted in global markets. Either way, we're very interested in how that connectivity happens. I've worked for many years with some of the largest corporates, MNCs, as they say in India, multinational corporations, family offices, institutional investors in the US, thinking about, and fintech companies, thinking about their India strategy, market entry, partnerships, et cetera, have led operations sort of in the US-India corridor in both directions and worked on policy initiatives around the financial services space in both sectors. And I saw that there was a lot of cultural connectivity. There's a very vibrant, brilliant Indian American community in the US. There's obviously many Indians that are leading US companies in the US technology sector. And there's a lot of Indians that study in the US and go back to India to build companies. But all of that being said, these really interesting ideas that were being germinated in India that truly were sort of pushing the needle forward in terms of various aspects of fintech were being missed by some of the largest global companies in the world, in the US and otherwise, because they typically wait till companies get very large to do partnerships and scale. And yet so much of the interesting action of innovation in India is happening at the earliest stages. And so what we do is we bridge that gap by jumping in with a very focused kind of global strategy with India at the center, make very early stage investments, and we are extremely hands-on partners with the founders in which we invest as sort of their eyes and ears to help with some of these global partnerships, help pull in the best minds in the world on the various specific verticals they're working on, build sort of new initiatives and projects with them, and also even in the Indian market, sort of help be a very subject matter focused partner for them in fintech, alongside many sort of blue chip, large global funds that are sector agnostic and generalist.
I really like the idea, Melissa, of EMVC, focused on early stage investments, because, you need to pick on these entrepreneurs at very early stages to give them the right kind of, tools and guidance to achieve and become the next big unicorn in India. So and I see you as someone who's a visionary in terms of being laser focused in picking the right entrepreneurs to work with and bringing together the best of the minds in the world who could elevate them to the next level.
Thank you so much. Really, that means a lot coming from you. And we are extremely bullish about our portfolio companies in our portfolio and some of the founders that we're working with in the broader ecosystem. I mean, they are just terrific and building things that really are globally leading. So very excited to be doing what we're doing.
Now, let me ask you this, Melissa. You're very passionate about working with entrepreneurs and helping them succeed. Did you always dream of being a venture capitalist? And how does it feel being a women venture capitalist in India?
I don't know, because I don't know the other option. In terms of the second question, no, I didn't always dream of being a VC at all. I always dreamed of delivering results. I mean, I really am sort of outcome oriented. And throughout all of my work, have been fortunate to be part of these really exciting projects in the US-India corridor and sort of right in the room where the action is happening in terms of kind of the future of financial services in the country. And I've always wanted to just kind of keep moving the needle forward. So it never was one specific goal. It's always been just a desire to kind of help be additive, be very high sort of signal to noise in terms of the work in a very kind of focused way and keep moving forward. And India has always kept pulling me in. I mean, I first went to India very early pre-university in my life. It was not an immediate obsession. It was more so that just one thing kept leading to another. And this broad sort of thesis, even in my life, of seeing how this digital story that's unfolding in India is one of the most exciting economic stories of our generation, has really driven me in terms of what I've wanted to do.
That's very amazing. That's very amazing. Now tell us this. Have you ever had a low moment in your career?
I mean, of course, anyone who says that they haven't is lying, right? I think the lowest or most challenging moments in my life have been in operating roles when I've had to kind of make tough calls in terms of letting go teams because of part of broader business strategies. Those are always, I mean, literally the worst days of work ever. And there's been a few of those. I'd say those are really kind of the lowest moments, particularly when the people involved are just terrific. And it really is more of a kind of macro strategy change than anything else. Those are the hardest because I really value the people that I work with and have been fortunate to work with awesome people. And so whenever there's changes around that, sort of the intersection of what's best professionally and for the company versus just wanting to see what's best for like terrific people is always a low day.
What do you say to yourself when you have such low moments in order to keep your drive going?
No, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I just keep the big picture in mind. And I feel that as long as I'm working sort of with integrity and very direct with people and a clear communicator and always have kind of the best objectives in mind and try to balance everything, that's the best that anyone can do, right? Everybody's always doing their best.
Very true. And that's very inspiring, Melissa. Do you have any parting thoughts to our listeners before we wrap up our episode?
No, I mean, I'd say that if you're listening and you're in the US tech ecosystem, consider checking out India and seeing what you can do with, one of the hundreds of extremely talented startup teams that are working there. There's so much to do. We are very happy to chat with you and explore what might make sense. And there's some great journalism and online resources to learn more and start to build that awareness, even if you're coming at it blind and you don't have any context for what's happening in Asia. Otherwise, it's the world is kind of getting smaller, especially with all of our online resources. And so there's no reason to really kind of expand your team and expand your partnership horizon and your business development horizon beyond your local market. And excited to kind of continue this work and engage with Priyanka, your networking community with this podcast and the broader ecosystem.
Thank you, Melissa, for those wonderful nuggets of wisdom. And Melissa, personally, I see you as one of the finest venture capitalist visionaries who's focused on, bringing the best of knowledge and strategic partnerships to the Indian ecosystem. So kudos on such wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, to our listeners, the 3 key takeaways with our podcast with Melissa Frakman, one of the finest venture capitalist visionaries focused on India and fintech ecosystem. One is keep pushing the needle forward no matter what, and always have the bigger picture in mind. And 2, as a startup, as an entrepreneur, the 3 things that you need to have is A, patience, B, in a consumer-driven market, you got to be absolutely on top of the game, and 3, focus on marketing. And 3, and the most important of all, irrespective of COVID and the global pandemic that's happening around us, India's ecosystem is still accelerating. And so if you're an entrepreneur out there, stay true to your vision and start networking with like-minded people like Melissa, EMVC, her portfolio of companies, to get the best for your companies and bring a real impact to our audiences globally. So thank you so much, Melissa, again, for joining us on our show. And we're truly honored that you took the time amidst your busy schedule, working across different time zones, to be with us today.
Lots of different time zones. Thank you so much, Priyanka, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And to our listeners, this is your host, Priyanka Komala, signing off from Curryup Startup Podcast, a podcast to spotlight Asian leaders and interesting allies like Melissa. Until another interesting episode with another interesting guest, we have a fun lineup coming up soon. Subscribe to our Curryup Startup Podcast on YouTube and all other podcast streaming platforms, and follow us on our Twitter and LinkedIn channels. Thank you.